This is Dave.
And this is Chris. We're from Hook Theory, and
You're
you are listening to the Musicality Podcast.
Ever wondered why some people seem to have a gift for music? Have you ever wished that you could play by ear, sing in tune, improvise and jam? You're in the right place. Time to turn those wishes into reality. Welcome to the Musicality Podcast with your host, Christopher Sutton.
Hi, this is Christopher, founder of Musical You, and welcome to the Musicality Podcast. Today I'm talking with Dave Carlton and Chris Anderson, two of the three creators of Hooktheory, one of my favorite music learning websites, and one that can transform the way you understand melodies and harmony in the music you love. Ryan Miyakawa, the third member of the Hooktheory team, couldn't be with us today, but we're hoping to have him on the show for a follow-up episode in future. Hooktheory is one of a handful of websites that I am constantly recommending to people who are learning music and looking for easier ways to understand music theory. I've been continually impressed with their approach and the quality of the teaching they provide, and it was a real delight to immerse myself last year in the two Hooktheory books. Hooktheory is a new way of visualizing notes and chords in music, as well as a very different and, in my opinion, far more effective and interesting way of teaching core music theory concepts in songwriting. In this conversation, we talk about the quite different musical backgrounds that the three Hooktheory creators have, and what they found a shared passion for that led to them creating Hooktheory together. We talk about what makes Hooktheory different and why that might matter to you. And we talk about whether or not interactive tools like HookPad, which make it easy to write music with assistance from the computer, are removing the need for learning music theory yourself. If you've never been to hooktheory.com, I know this conversation will inspire you to go dive in. And if you've seen Hooktheory in action, then I know you're going to enjoy this peek behind the scenes of where such a cool project came from and what's in store for the future. My name is Christopher Sutton, and this is the Musicality Podcast from Musical You. Welcome to the show, Dave and Chris. Thank you for joining us today.
Hey, Christopher. Great to be here.
Yeah, agree. Thanks, Christopher. It's good to talk to you.
So I'd love to begin at the beginning and understand, because Hooktheory is a really interesting project in terms of the way you approach music theory and learning to write music. I'd love to understand where each of you is coming from in terms of music, how you got started, and what music education looked like for each of you.
Sure, I'll take the lead. So I'm a self-taught guitar player, and I also play a little bit of piano, and I picked up guitar when I was about 21. It was my third year of college, and I spent the summer at this internship, and I moved in with one of my college buddies, and he had this really sweet US like Fender Strat, and I just always saw it over in the corner of the room, and he'd play it every now and then, and I'm like, hey, could you show me a couple chords? And so started playing guitar, and I would say I was a very typical like self-taught guitar player. I, looked up tabs for like Wonderwall and Led Zeppelin songs, and just kind of like continued to get better playing and learn more and more songs. And like eventually I met Ryan, who's one of the other Hooktheory people, and this was probably a couple years after, so my first year at grad school, and he ended up teaching me a little bit of music theory, and so that ended up having like a huge influence on my musical endeavors. But I definitely have no formal music education. In fact, I can read sheet music because like technically I know how to do it, but I wouldn't say I'm the type of person that looks at sheet music and plays it. I think Dave comes from like a completely different
I certainly grew up, I guess I would call myself classically trained. I grew up playing the piano from a pretty early age. And then played the trumpet in a high school band as well as college. But I wouldn't call myself I wasn't a very serious musician. I certainly was, practicing a lot, but I wasn't going into big important recitals or anything. So it wasn't really until college, and I took a lot of music classes in college and really got interested in it then. And that's kind of when I think our shared interest for starting something like Hooktheory kind of began, when we got more serious about music.
Yeah, and then there's Ryan, who's not here right now, but he, the guy, like one of his first memories as a kid is literally like sneaking down they had a piano at their house, and he would like sneak down to the piano and play like little, like, not, I don't know if it was pop songs because he was like such a kid, but like little tunes he'd hear from like a cartoon or something that he would really like, but he wasn't allowed to play those during his like music lessons. So he would like sneak down and play those. And so he grew up with like a super formal, education from very, very young age. And, he has like perfect pitch, just incredible songwriter, just musically, just incredibly solid. I mean, you could put him in a room with pretty much any musician in the world, and he could he hold his own. And so he, I think, like, is sort of the music glue that kind of brought the three of us together, I would say, to even
Ryan and I actually grew up
get
together.
going on.
We were really, really good friends growing up. We went to the same elementary school, high school, college, grad school. So we go back a long ways, and definitely would second everything that Chris said about he's definitely I would consider a musical genius.
Very cool. And so it sounds like you each have quite different musical backgrounds. Maybe Dave, you and Ryan have a bit more in common in terms of the classical training.
Yeah, I would consider myself very much in the middle. Yeah,
okay. And
so I think, as you say, it's kind of an interesting mix because it really covers a lot of bases, from the casual guitarist to the really serious musician to kind of in between.
And how did that work for you guys? Because, for my part, knowing musicians, they don't always play well with others, particularly when you have that difference in backgrounds. Did you guys just find you clicked? Were there any awkward moments trying to find musical common ground? Or?
Well, so I think we came together just as friends, right? So I met the two of them in grad school, and they had already known each other for like a long time, as Dave just said. And I came into the group, and we were just buddies for several years. But it was really, I think, when Ryan, so there's a part I kind of left out, which is when I first got to Berkeley, like I'd already been playing guitar for a couple of years. And then as I started hanging out with Ryan, I would sometimes have my guitar with me. And there's this one moment that I'll never forget, which was one of the first times I came over to his house, and I was sitting in the living room just strumming some chords on my Taylor guitar, and he was in the other room, like doing dishes, like not even looking at me. And I had strummed a couple chords, and I just hear him like kind of turn off the sync, and he says, "Play a B minor." And I'm like, "What?" So I play a B minor, and it was literally just like the exact perfect next chord. And I'm like, how did he know that? Like, not only did he know like what chords I was already playing, so he was able to hear that, but then he knew like what would sound good next. So that was kind of the beginning of like, how did you know that? And so he started teaching me essentially the basics of music theory and how music works, but he did it in just the most awesome, intuitive, simple way. Like, there was no sheet music. He just like explained things in a very fundamental, simple way. And after about a year of that, I was like, I always, in the back of my mind, was thinking like, God, I bet you every other musician in the world would love to have someone like Ryan teach them. And that in my mind was like the seed of kind of like of Hook Theory, actually. That was even like years before we ever even started building Hook Theory, but was this way that Ryan taught me. And so we always knew that there was this kind of unmet demand of all these self-taught, musicians that, either can't read sheet music or don't have formal training, and music theory is super intimidating to them, and that would love this information. But they needed like a consumable, like, delightful kind of like intuitive way to learn it. And so it was easy to answer your question. Like we just came together, and there was no question about kind of what we wanted to do and where we felt the gap was.
Cool. And one thing I'm always keen to ask about when I talk to people like yourselves who started these phenomenal projects, what gave you the drive to create something? You'd had this insight that there was a better way to learn music theory, and you'd enjoyed the benefit of it for yourself. But I know firsthand how hard it is to create something from nothing and get it out there and get it in a form that people like and enjoy and can use. So what was it that brought the three of you together to actually make that happen?
Good question. I think I think all three of us really like teaching, and we also like building stuff together as friends. So kind of combining those two together, it kind of made it easy. And it was just a fun thing for us to do. So we just enjoyed working on it. And if it wasn't something that we enjoyed doing, we wouldn't be doing it for as long as we have.
Yeah. I mean, when we first started, we would just, it was like every week we would meet at Ryan and Dave lived together at the time. And I would just go over to their house at like 8:00 at night, and we would just sit up in Ryan's room, until like 2:30 in the morning and just start writing software and developing like our teaching method and the visualizations and all that stuff. And it was like one of the funnest times. I mean, it was so cool. I just like building something. I mean, I don't know. It was like right after kind of like that Facebook movie came out, and it was like just, you could just see like how awesome it can be to like build something. Not that we're anything close to Facebook, but yeah, it was fun. It was great.
And so are the three of you all software developers by background? Do you all have that skill set to build something in terms of web software?
Yeah, we're all engineers by day. That's kind of a shared skill that we all have. So it's definitely been very useful to be able to apply that knowledge to music and write software to help people learn. And
Dave, you mentioned something before about how you consider yourself a classical musician. And I think it might surprise some people that from that background, you've created, as part of a team, a product that is so clearly oriented towards the creative side of music making, because, the classical way of learning music is really about reproducing other people's repertoire on your instrument to a large extent, or very rigid, structured composition. I'd love to hear, what was it that led you to that approach to music, or that outlook on what music making can be?
Yeah, I mean, for me, growing up as a classically trained musician, quote unquote, it was always still very mysterious, because I knew all my scales and I could play on the instruments, but as you say, it's very much just reproducing songs that other people have written, and I really had no idea, frankly, how to go from a scale to a full song. And that was something that Ryan obviously knew how to do. And once I got to college and learned some more music theory, I kind of picked some more stuff up. But it was always kind of a mystery, and it was always something that I was very interested in, and didn't feel like there were any good resources available, despite the interest that I had. Even as a classically trained musician, I felt like I was kind of lacking in resources.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that, which is like, as someone who couldn't read sheet music. And, I was in grad school for, like engineering, and I'm fine learning new things, but it was just like, it felt like just such a huge barrier. I'm like, oh God, I gotta learn how to read sheet music before I can even get started understanding any of these concepts. It was like, no, I'm not gonna bother with that, and so yeah, seeing there was a path to the information that just like literally leapfrogged over the notation was was awesome. And we're like, we gotta share this with everybody.
Yeah, and this may or may not be the same question as what makes Hook Theory different and innovative, but you mentioned that Ryan had a particular way of explaining things that just made it so much easier, and you wanted to share that way of teaching music with a larger audience. What was it that characterized that? What made it so different and so effective for you?
Well, so the first thing, and this may sound just so incredibly simple, but was the idea of songs kind of being in a key, and that you can name the chords by the number chord they are in the key. So let's go with like a simple example of chords that probably most people have played before. Like if you play a G chord and then a D chord and then a C chord, those are all in the key of G, and the G chord would be called like the first chord, because it's the G chord and you're in the G scale. And then, the D chord would be called the 5 chord, and the C chord would be called the 4 chord. And that was like really the beginning of what Ryan was teaching me. He's like, so, when you play those chords, he's like, try in your head to just think of them as 1, 5, 4. Don't think of them necessarily as G, D, C. And then he's like, so you can take that same pattern, 1, 5, 4, and, play it in a different key, for example. So, if you were going to start out in the key of D, that same pattern 1-5-4 would be like the D chord, the A chord, and then the G chord. And so I was like, oh wow, so you can actually take the chord names, which there are so many chord names, right? Because there's basically like 12 different, major keys. There's all these different chord names and sharps and flats and blah, 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 blah. And like, you can just boil it down to these 7 numbers. And that to me was this like really beautiful aha moment. So I started thinking of songs that'd be like, oh, I want to play this, Guns N' Roses song. You'd be like, oh, that's just a 1-4-6, progression. And it was like, it doesn't even matter what the key I play it in. I can just play it in whatever key I want, and it'll still fundamentally sound the same. So that like basic concept was the thing that just, I was like, this is so simple. How come this isn't just common knowledge everywhere? And yeah, so it was really that.
Yeah, and I think beyond that, just then the fact that there's tendencies that certain chords within that 7 chord system go together in different ways. And if you're playing this chord, there's another chord that'll very likely will sound good if you play it next. Is also kind of the next step beyond that. And I always found that those are some of the tendencies that I didn't really know and found really fascinating as I was kind of learning more music theory and harmony.
I've said this on the podcast a few times at this point, but I'm still kind of confused as to why this isn't a bigger part of music education. And for me, growing up in the UK instrument learning system, when you studied music theory, you got a bit into functional harmony, and you would have the basic intellectual understanding that, yes, you can number the chords in the key, and you probably did some exercises to figure out what they'd be in different keys. But nobody made that bridge to the songs I was actually playing and what this might mean for playing by ear, or how this might apply to figuring out melodies or improvising melodies. And one of the things I love about Hook Theory is that you so naturally bridge those two worlds. You're rooted in functional harmony and how things have always worked, but you're talking very much in practical terms and using song examples that 100% make sense to people. And I just think I still find it kind of flabbergasting that this isn't normal. It sounds like you guys were feeling a bit the same. Like, why isn't it taught this way?
To me, it's always, it's scales are very important. And, and doing these intellectual exercises are super crucial. But it's kind of, that was what music theory meant to me. And so it didn't have the connection to real music. And that's kind of one of the things that we tried to make.
So that's clearly one of the really defining things about Hook Theory, that you're looking at everything in these functional terms. You're talking about notes and chords relative to the tonic, and so relative to the key. One of the other things that I think jumps out to someone who comes to Hook Theory for the first time is that it's very colorful, which isn't something we normally associate with music. If you look at traditional staff notation, it's black and white, that's that. Tell us a bit about that color system and why it is such a colorful way of representing music.
Yeah, so we color all the scale degrees, these numbers of the scale. We give them the colors of the rainbow. And the reason we do that is to emphasize that regardless of what key you're in, whether you're in the key of C or the key of G, that one chord or that first note of the scale is always going to be red to kind of keep you grounded in this functional system. And it also, I think, and one of the other reasons we do it is to reinforce the functionality of each of these notes in the scale by giving another sense, a color in this case, to the scale degrees. It reinforces it, and it's kind of another ear training device to kind of help with that.
Yeah, and I would just to add to that, this was right around the time when Guitar Hero, which is that game that was on PlayStation, had just exploded, and it just got so much traction. And the simple beauty of that game was you had this controller with 4 square buttons that were 4 different colors, and you had basically 4 different like colors on the video game screen, and you would just match color to color. And we just knew that was like an interface that people find intuitive, and that colors, just humans like color. And so it's a nice tool to quickly trigger memory and like help you recognize patterns. So it's like you can just look at a song in Hook Theory and be like, oh, that's red, blue, green, purple. And maybe that's to you what a 1-1, I guess that's 1-1-5-4-6, or I don't even know what colors I said, but maybe to you, like red, green, blue, purple is the sound, right? And that's cool. And originally, so Ryan, this is just a side note because this is kind of a funny story. So Ryan has synesthesia, which is this really, really interesting condition for those of you who don't know about it, where he literally associates everything with a color. Like, I mean, everything. So it's something like a musical pitch is like a very specific color to him. Like I am a color to him. Like Chris is a color to him. Like Dave is a color to him. Everything's color. So he already had all these colors for like scale degrees, and they were these random colors. And he like really, really, really wanted them to be his colors. I was like, no, man, we have to do the rainbow. Like we're not betting on this. I think he's finally okay with our color system.
That's great. I think it's a really elegant solution. It makes me think of the Kodai approach to Solfa, where you don't just have a name for each note, you have a hand sign too, and it gives you that physical sense of, what do is and how re relates to it and so on. And I think it's so powerful for giving the brain another handle on what's going on in the music you hear. So when we spoke back in 2013, you guys had been up and running for a little while, but it was still fairly early days. And one of the things that was jumping out then was that hook theory was getting used a lot by songwriters to understand, what are normal chord progressions and what are the options in terms of chords in songs. Was that what led on to the Hook Theory books, or was that something that was always part of the vision for what hook theory could be?
I'd say the books were really kind of from the beginning. We really had this method in mind for how and what we wanted to. We had something to say about how we wanted to teach music, and we were going to write those books. And so that was really part of it from the beginning. Yeah.
Yeah. So the second book just came out about a year ago, actually, and that's like the intermediate, advanced level stuff. But we really like hook theory literally started with the first book. I mean, that was almost, all of hook theory in the beginning. And then as we built the like music examples for the book, so the book's filled with all of these music concepts. And every time we teach a concept, we'll show how it's done in a real song. So, we analyzed probably, a few hundred little clips of like Bob Dylan songs and, Aerosmith songs and this and that in the first book. And then we were like, well, these things kind of stand alone. And then we had this idea, what if we could make a whole part of the website where you could actually see like the theory behind, real songs that you like. Instead of looking up a guitar tab, we could look up like the functional chord changes and melody changes. And that was, so when we launched, it was essentially the first book and then this part of the website where at the time they're now called theory tabs. But at the time, I don't even know what we called them. We called them analyses, I think.
Yeah. Something less cool.
Yeah. But that was where we started.
Awesome. I wrote reviews of the 2 Hook Theory books last year on our website. And I think I said in one of the reviews, this is very much the music theory book I wish I'd had. And I think there are 2 amazing things that do set it apart from your traditional music theory book. And the first is just the overall approach, the fact that you are explaining things not, here are the rules, this is how it's always worked, learn the rules and apply them, but let's look at songs. What do songs do? Why do the chords do this in songs? How can we learn from that? It's very much that practical and modern perspective on why music theory matters. And the other amazing thing is that, it's hard to really convey in an audio form like this. I'll put links to the reviews in the show notes so people can read and see screenshots and videos there. But these are books in the very modern sense of the word. This is something you use on your computer or your tablet. It's got embedded videos, it's got sound examples, and you guys pack it with very clear, vivid illustrations, animations really, of what's going on in the song as you hear it. And I'm jealous in a way of today's musician that gets to come up and use that as their theory book, because I think it totally transforms your relationship to what theory can be and what it can do for you.
Well, thank you. I mean, that's exactly why we created them. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, you couldn't have said it better.
Yes, that's why they exist. I mean, yeah, we felt the same way.
And the last piece of the puzzle, as it were, I suppose, is the HookPad system, which gives people an interactive environment for putting all of this into practice and starting to experiment. Can you tell us a bit about how HookPad works?
Yeah, it uses the same system with the colors and kind of thinking about music functionally as the system we teach in the book. But it's a very quick way of writing out your chord progressions and melodies in this system. And so a lot of composers, songwriters will very quickly fire up HookPad, and then you want to write a quick progression, 1-4-5, 1-5-6-4. You just type 1-5-6-4 on the keyboard, and boom, you have your chord progression. And it'll play it back for you, and you can transpose it to whatever key. The key is sort of, as we said, doesn't really matter, but you can transpose it to whatever key you want and export it to your guitar tab or your conventional sheet music, or if you want to compose something in GarageBand or Logic, you can export it as a MIDI. So yeah, we found it a very useful tool, and for making connections to the book. So if you're using it as a companion while you're trying to learn, it's great for that. But then if you want to try to write your own music, it's great for that too.
Yeah. So, and then HookPad does some things that I still to this day just think are literally like magical. So, one of the things that it does that I think is so cool is, say you put in a chord progression like Dave said. So 1-5-4. For those of you that are new to these numbers, let's pretend we're in the key of G. So I've put down a G chord, a D chord, and a C chord. Very pleasant, nice sounding chord progression. What HookPad can do, so HookPad has a chord staff, and then above it, it's got a melody staff. And HookPad can tell you over each chord, so there's 3 different chords there, G, D, C. Over each chord, there's kind of a subset of notes that if you base your melody around those notes, your melody will kind of have this nice, stable sound. And it gives you essentially like these guidelines for how to kind of lay out your melody. It's not like, oh, use only these notes, but it's just saying like, hey, if you kind of make sure to include these notes at least probably half of the time, your melody is going to sound pretty darn good. And that is just the coolest thing ever, in my opinion. And it's one of the things that actually hook theory as a whole does, is it shows you these relationships between not like the chords on their own, but then also like how the melody relates to the chords. And so HookPad's great for that. Another cool thing about HookPad is it can help you find out a good next chord. So like, and it's called magic chord. And you can literally, if you want, just open HookPad and just hit magic chord, magic chord, magic chord, magic chord, and it'll basically write like a little song. And that's really cool. And when you do a magic chord, it'll tell you the context. It'll say like, oh, in 1972, the Beatles used this chord in this same way. And yeah, so it does some things that to me, like now they're just so normal because I've been using HookPad for so long, but wow, like the ability to actually get a lot of help composing a melody is something that the HookPad does that really, I don't think anything else can do that today. There's nothing else. So yeah, that's cool. And we're about to release HookPad 2, which is going to have even more awesome stuff.
But that was a brutal teaser. Do you have a release date in mind? Can we tell the audience when to expect HookPad 2?
Yes. So I think we started a year ago. It's been, a ton of work. We were hoping to get it out in this year. Like, I don't think we're going to hit that. But we're really close. So I would say
early next year,
early 2018. It's getting very close.
Yeah. We're real excited about it.
Fantastic. So the 2 things you touched on there, I think, are great examples of what makes your approach so innovative and interesting. Chord tones, for example. We had a recent podcast episode talking about how training your ear to hear the notes in chords can let you write melodies or play melodies by ear or improvise because you understand that connection between the melody and the chords. And similarly, your magic chord feature does sound like magic. And at the same time, it's something that, you know, songwriters traditionally have had to learn and internalize and kind of build up their vocabulary of what chords work well together. Those are both things where, you know, traditionally technology couldn't really help you. And there's a set of people these days who would argue that technology is removing the need to develop those skills. You know, if you have a tool like HookPad, do you really need to understand what a 1-4-5 is if you can just press the button? Do you really need to know how to listen for the notes in music if you can just kind of try things out and hear them played for you? Where do you guys stand on that? Do you see technology replacing the need for that kind of traditional music education?
Well, HookPad really certainly makes experimenting easier with different sounds. So in that way, I guess it would help if you didn't know anything, but it's certainly the more music theory you bring to the table, the richer your usability of HookPad is going to be, because it's based on music theory, and it talks the language of music theory. So we certainly are firmly in the camp that the more you know, the better your songwriting is going to be. I think to use an analogy, it'd be pretty ridiculous if you wanted to be a poet, but you didn't think that you needed to learn the language, and you could just get around, you know, putting words together randomly that you find in a word generator or something like that.
Right. Yeah. I mean, music is always going to be art in addition to any sort of scientific approach that one might take, you know, to writing a song. And yeah, like, this is like an even broader question, right? It's like, we're getting into this future now where like all these like artificial intelligence and like virtual kind of intelligence things can help us do tasks in general, like possibly better. And I think ultimately, like with music though, it's there's yeah, I think like in general that you don't ever want to be so reliant on technology that's all the only way you can do something. You know, I think like there's always going to be a moment when you'll be like sitting around a campfire or something, and you need to rely on your own skills, and like you don't have HookPad with you. So yeah, I mean, we definitely view it as a tool to help you explore, to help you create, and it's kind of like if you were in a room with one of your good friends and they were also a good musician, and like they could bounce ideas, you could bounce ideas off of them. That's like kind of like where we philosophically like see HookPad as like this tool to help you, but I also don't want it to be like, you know, a crutch, and that's like the only way you can do things.
Gotcha. So we've talked about a few different things there. We talked about the theory tab, where people can see the notes and chords of popular music and start to get a sense of how it all fits together. We talked about the Hooktheory Books, which are very rich multimedia ways of exploring this functional approach to harmony and songwriting. And we just talked about HookPad, which lets people experiment and start creating their own musical ideas. For someone who's new to hook theory and wants to dive in, they're excited about everything they've heard in this conversation, what's the best place for them to start?
Probably the best place to start is reading about, I mean, you've already talked a lot about the books, but you know, that we have the page where we like talk about the books in a little more detail. Like read that, and if you think it's a good fit, get the first book. I mean, I know that it sounds silly to be like, oh, buy our product, but yeah, it's like, it's pretty cheap. It's only like $14.99, and it's the introduction really to the whole system. That's assuming that you kind of don't know any music theory, and you're this person that, you know, like is really hungry and interested in this. And if you already know a lot, you can probably go straight to our theory tab area, which is like the big library of songs. If you're interested in seeing like, oh wow, like what's the theory of Stairway to Heaven? But yeah, so I think like the books really are the best place to start, I think.
Yeah, and I guess we have some blog posts too if you're not quite ready to shell out some money. We do have some stuff that kind of talks about some specific concepts that you can get an idea for the way we talk about music.
Oh, I was just gonna say too, the books are like, we have like 100% refund policy. Like if somebody emails us in 2 years and was like, oh, I bought this book 2 years ago and, I didn't like it. We just, here's your money back. No problem. Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's super low risk, low commitment.
Cool. And I wouldn't undersell how much is packed into that first book. I think even if you understand intellectually what, say, a 1-4-5 chord progression is, it's taught in such a different way and such a rich way. I found it really just such a pleasure to read because it does give you a different perspective, even on things you think you know. And book 2 takes that to a whole other level. I think definitely worth checking out the contents of those books and seeing, is it something you'd like to explore more?
Yeah, I mean, like on a personal level, I mean, I'm literally, I think of all the things I've done in my whole life, like I think those 2 books, being part of those is like the thing I'm the most proud of. I mean, we just poured everything into those books and we think we really love them. And I think, so.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure to get to talk to you both. As you know, I am a huge fan of Hook Theory and those books and HookPad. I just think you have such a unique and valuable way of teaching some of the most important concepts in music. So thank you so much for taking the time to join us on the Musicality podcast today.
Thanks for having us, Christopher. It's been a real pleasure.
Yeah, thanks, Christopher.
The Musicality podcast is brought to you by Musical U. Learn more at musical-u.com.
It's hard to explain in conversation just how Hook Theory works. You definitely need to go take a look for yourself. But I hope this conversation has given you some insight into where it came from, what makes it different, and how it could be valuable in giving you a new insight into how music works. Let's recap the big points we covered there. Dave, Chris, and Ryan each come from quite different musical backgrounds. Ryan was musically very capable from an early age, and he experiences music with perfect pitch and synesthesia. Dave has formal classical training in piano and trumpet, and Chris is a mostly self-taught guitarist for whom the music theory came much later. They found a shared passion for a particular way of teaching music theory, which I would say is characterized by 2 things. The first is an emphasis on interpreting notes and chords relative to the tonic, i.e. the key or the scale. Doing this means that melody notes and harmony chords can be thought of in terms of numbers, and the same patterns can be learned, recognized by ear, and used in songwriting no matter what key you're in. The second notable thing is to teach theory in a very modern and practical way, not defining music theory as a set of abstract rules to be applied, but instead starting from musical examples in the songs we hear every day, and then explaining why the notes and chords in those songs work the way they do. Dave, Chris, and Ryan took this unique approach, and they created Hook Theory, a website, a pair of multimedia ebooks, and an interactive songwriting app. At its heart, Hook Theory is a clever, interactive, and animated way to visualize what's going on in the notes and chords of songs. By using a different color for each degree of the scale, along with an intuitive layout of what's happening in pitch over time, Hook Theory provides an innovative but very natural way to understand music. Around this core technology, they've built up a huge database of modern song examples created by their enthusiastic users so that you can explore artists or songs you like and see immediately what's going on musically. They've written 2 extensive books, which, honestly, I wish had been my theory books growing up, because they provide a truly different and vastly more interesting and useful way of approaching these topics. And they've created an interactive experimental lab of sorts with HookPad, so that budding songwriters, or just those curious to play around with the theory ideas, can try things out and get explanations and assistance as you put together your own musical creations. Whether you already have a good grasp of music theory, or you're just starting out, and whether you want to write music yourself, or just better understand the music you hear and love, I really recommend heading to hooktheory.com and exploring everything they offer there. Try playing a few of their Theory tab examples to see the system in action, and then maybe pick up the first Hook Theory book. And make sure to look out for HookPad version 2 coming very soon and bound to be packed with even more nifty features like showing you suggested notes to use for melodies and offering you the magic chord to put next in your own songs. Thanks for listening to this episode. And if you are wondering why Hook Theory is called Hook Theory, stay tuned for our next episode, where we'll be talking about what exactly a hook in music is.
Thank you for listening to the Musicality Podcast. This episode has ended, but your musical journey continues. Head over to musicalitypodcast.com, where you will find the links and resources mentioned in this episode, as well as bonus content exclusive for podcast listeners. That's musicalitypodcast.com.